having a lust for war. It's the American way, right? Wait, hang on. What? Having a lust for war? That it's not supposed to be the characteristic American trait that we lust for war. But if we're being honest, and that's all we are about on this show, is about integrity and honest and being unintimidated and uncompromised on telling you the truth. Well, this is a growing, ugly truth that's starting to more and more characterize our country in ways that I'm very uncomfortable with. And I know many of you are as well. We're going to look at it today a little bit. We're going to do a deep dive into just why this is, and especially when it comes to Iran, what in the world is it that's driving so many of our senior leaders to just be something close to obsessed with attacking Iran? I'm going to show you some of these clips to illustrate what we're talking about here. And then I'm going to lay out some facts for you to where you can see that these guys are nuts. And if Biden listens to them, if he gives into this pressure, we're all going to pay a serious price for this one of these days. We've already paid one price, but I'm telling you, folks, it can get a lot worse for America. So first of all, let's kind of bring you up to speed of where we are right now. Now, a week ago, of course, as now everyone knows, 3 Americans were killed in an outpost just across the Syrian border in Jordan. And then President Biden, using his constitutional requirement, went after the people that did it and struck a number of targets. Now, per se, that's appropriate, as I have indicated as well. I think that's what we're supposed to do. If our troops get killed, then you have to bring justice to the people that killed them. But as I've also said, they shouldn't have been there at all, so that they wouldn't have been a target for these people, that we would need to respond. But the bigger question is going to be, what do you do next? Now, Biden said, and many of his senior leaders in the Pentagon and the White House said that these strikes were supposed to deter these groups, to show them that there's a price to pay for continuing to attack. And of course, it didn't have any impact, exactly as we said that it wouldn't. And even yesterday, there was another attack on an American base in Syria, in the Deir ez-Zor region, and 6 of our allies, the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, were killed. Another 18 or 30 were wounded. And look, the only reason those weren't Americans that were killed is because the target hit the wrong. The Islamic people hit the wrong target. I'm sure they were not trying to get these Syrian Democratic Forces. They were trying to get Americans, and they just hit the wrong building. Otherwise, all the things that I'm about to show you would already be hyperventilating even more today than they already are. And that is, they'll be trying to tell Biden we have to strike Iran. So let's take a look, first of all, here as to why some of these people are talking about why are we there. Now, as I've laid out for you, there is no reason for us to be there. There is no valid military mission. I've literally been saying it for years, since at least 2019, publicly on Fox and all the years in between there, that it's nothing but a strategic point of vulnerability. There's no value for our country and all kinds of downside risk. Now we're seeing that play out. Well, because some of these people who lust for war with Iran are concerned that people may say, why are we there? They have to come up with some new justification. Here's the way a couple of them, starting with Jack Keane, put it.
The people of the United States to say, what are we still doing in Iraq and Syria? I thought that thing was over. But we've had multiple presidents that recognize we have to deal with ISIS. President Trump left forces there for the same reason, and President Biden obviously has left them there, but Iran has a different view. They're driving us out. They want to weaken our resolve and our political will. That's what this is all about. That's why I say you attack the disruptors, certainly the proxies themselves, but you've got to hold Iran accountable with some kind of limited military action to make certain that they get the message that their assets are vulnerable, and we're not going to stand idly by.
Yeah, so it's all about ISIS, man. We've got to keep fighting for ISIS. That's just like holding up a scarecrow. Oh my God! Or if these guys, these ISIS people, they're coming to get you. You people in Kansas, you got to look out, man. We're looking out for you, because otherwise, definitely you guys are going to be targets. So, wow, this is something you got to do. That's what he's trying to scare you with. And his brother in arms there, Lindsey Graham, added this part.
President Biden has all the authority under Article 2 to protect troops in the field. They're over there to prevent ISIS from coming back. They're just not on vacation. They're not hanging out in the Mideast. They're there to make sure ISIS and Al-Qaeda do not attack us here.
Okay.
Iran is trying to drive us out of the Mideast, and the response we're giving is inadequate to the task. They do not believe or fear that we will hit what matters most to them.
Okay, let's examine that anti-ISIS mission. Now he's throwing Al-Qaeda back in there, hearkening back to the 9/11 fears that used to be the normal go-to for these war firsters like Graham and Keane. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, again, frighten you by holding up ghosts or scarecrows of things that they want to claim are the facts. But let's see, is that true? Are those troops on the ground there in Iraq and in Syria actually defending us here? So as President Bush used to infamously say, we'll fight them there so we don't have to fight them here. That was nonsense from the beginning. Let me explain to you how much nonsense that is here. So Tower 22 that was hit where the U.S. troops were killed was an outpost of about 350 people. I was once in Iraq on a very small outpost right by not far from the Iraq-Iran border, because I was leading a group there that was training Iraqi border battalion soldiers in 2009, and it was about maybe 100, so it was about a third of that size, but it was still quite small. And I can assure you, we spent most of our time defending ourselves and providing perimeter security. And then the rest of it was basically people, with administrative functions, mess hall kind of deals, just living quarters, all that kind of stuff. There was very little we could actually do because you can't project power out of a small base like that. Tower 22 itself was primarily an interdiction or a logistics base to help some of the other bases in the area there. One of our bases in Deir ez-Zor was actually funded from there or provided from there. And all these other bases have small amounts. The whole of Syria had allegedly 900 total American uniformed personnel. All the sources in Iraq, the total 2,500. Folks, that's like a little pinprick dot on the map, and it doesn't provide any military capacity. So just point blank, I can categorically tell you that what Lindsey Graham told you there is absolutely false. Those troops do not keep you safe from anything. The most they can do is try to keep themselves safe. And you see that with the threats that are facing the region, now then 3 of them finally didn't succeed. And many others didn't succeed before that. They just didn't get killed. These folks are nothing but vulnerable. It's a strategic vulnerability and it's a tactical vulnerability for them. Because consider this, literally, these guys are sitting in the desert scanning the skies every day, wondering if they're going to get hit with an IED or a drone strike, or wondering if a rocket's going to find its way through the air defenses this time. That's all they're doing. They're not performing any vital operation that's keeping America safe here. So that's the first point. It is a lie, and I'm going to just use that term because that's what it is. It's a known falsehood, or else they're ignorant and they don't realize it. I guess I can't categorically say it. I can categorically say it's untrue and it's inaccurate. Those troops don't help you. So get that first. Now, if you understand that there is no valid military mission for those troops there, that they're in harm's way, that some have made the ultimate sacrifice, and that our country did not benefit from it at all, then you have to start saying, hang on, why are we leaving them there? The troops, no other troops haven't been killed yet. Why do we want to leave them there for that to happen? And look, as I just said there, it should have happened yesterday because other of our allied troops were killed. And if the thing had just hit a different building, we would already be having this conversation, and yet more flag draped coffins would be on their way to Dover today. Look, folks, I don't want to see any more of that. The last thing I want is more pointless American deaths. We should hold their lives with a great deal of treasure and say that they're a precious commodity that we will not expend on unless it is absolutely necessary and vital to our survival as a nation. That's why we have military, folks, not just to toss around on a desert somewhere to use as fodder So some people who have a lust for war can get their way, because that's where we're headed. Now, let's take a look now at another couple of views here. So that's those two guys are trying to lay out the rationale why these troops must stay there. But now we get to the real focus, and there is this absolute obsession with war with Iran. We'll start off first with Brother Dave.
If I were advising, on the target option list would be targets in Iran, without question. It's just I'm not certain that this is when you want to begin those targets.
Well, let's hope that you don't ever get in a position again to actually make that advisement, at least not directly to the president, because that's nonsense. That's where you will start a war. That's how an actual war with the United States in another state would start. But if you listen to Keene, he'll try to say, no, don't worry about that. We're not talking about a war. We're just talking about, well, I'll let him put it in his own words.
An attack on Iranian soil? Should that be part of the plan?
It should be. Of course it should be. Absolutely. We're not talking about a go-to-war attack on Iran that we've seen before when we lit up Baghdad. I mean, that's nobody's advocating anything like that. When the administration says, well, we don't want to escalate, we don't want to widen the war, and no one wants a war with Iran, well, of course, no one's proposing a war with Iran, but holding Iran accountable in terms of some of their assets, the IRGC assets, the leadership, and their physical assets themselves in a limited, measured way makes sense, and letting them know that we won't stop there.
Oh, yeah, we're not talking about a war. We're just talking about killing their troops and killing their political and military leaders. That's it. We're just going to send a message. We don't want a war. They don't want a war either. It's no big deal. Okay, just a mental game here for a second. Let me ask you this. If Russia were to make a strike and kill American troops, say in Poland or in Romania, where we have troops all over the place there, who have been involved with helping funnel weapons and ammunition and other kinds of help into Ukraine there, and in the process they kill one of our generals, are we going to say, well, I mean, Russia doesn't want a war with us, and well, we were helping Ukraine kill Russian soldiers, so yeah, I get it. So I guess we, dang it, all right, we'll just back down. It's absurd. Even as I'm saying the words, it probably makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The idea that Russia would kill American troops in another country, they would reach out and kill our troops and then claim it was because they're trying to deter us from helping their adversary, their enemy. I mean, it's absurd. Of course, there would be a war almost at immediate, because that is an act of war. Keene even specifies, yes, we should attack on Iranian soil, killing their military, killing their leaders, and it won't be a war. That is either a lie or a grotesque malfeasance of incapacity, because he's advising in the American public and presumably leaders behind the scenes that we should take action that are literal acts of war, but we won't actually have one. I mean, it's absurd. It's ludicrous to suggest. And another former general, General Hodges, actually says something similar. It's like, man, why is everybody worried about war?
I'm not nervous that it'll spin out of control. What I'm nervous about is that we, the United States and our allies, are so focused on avoiding escalation that we somehow do not punish enough the various Iranian proxies.
Well, we just need to punish them enough. That's all we're saying. I don't know why everybody's worried about escalation. Because, General Hodges, we don't want a damn war. We don't want people to listen to you, to David Petraeus, to Jack Keene, and then get us sucked into a war so that all of a sudden we have a whole slew of flag-draped coffins rolling through the Dover Air Force Base. I don't want one more. And you're taking action. You're so careless with the lives of our troops. It angers me as someone who did serve in a military and did go to 4 deployments, how careless you are with the lives of our troops. I mean, look, you probably saw those grieving family members of those troops on various networks that were played, in the immediate aftermath of that, and just how grieved they were. And look, that played its cycle. It's no longer on the media front page, but I can assure you with all certainty that their pain is no less today than it was on the day that they were on there, and it's going to get worse as time goes on. It'll take years to recover from that kind of stuff. Some people never do. I know I still follow some pages of some of the people who were killed in Afghanistan during the time I was there, and it still is anguishing when it comes up to the either like an anniversary or like the date of when they lost their lives. It just is a perpetual knife in the chest to these people. Think about them when what's going on there. Iran, even some of the stuff they're doing is a nuisance in the region, and I don't dispute that. They're doing a lot of things that are a nuisance and are problematic, but things that we can work through. But when you take action that actually are acts of war that could then get us sucked into, because folks, once Iran acts irrationally in response to one of these, let's say that Keane gets his way and the next round of that Biden launches is something against the IRGC on Iran proper. Now then, what Keane wants to happen, what Petraeus wants to happen, what Hodges wants to happen is that Iran will back down, is that they'll just lay down and say quit. Now, what if they don't? What if instead the fur on the back of their head sticks up and they say, you know what, I'm sick of this, and they launch and they actually hit a ballistic missile on an American base on there, one of these vulnerable bases I keep talking about, and like 25 Americans are killed, 100 are wounded, or something like that. In any of these dots that are so easy, within easy range of Iranian missiles, and our defensive capacities there are not designed for theater ballistic missile defenses. They're local stuff, mortars, small homemade rockets that a lot of these people have. That's what they're for. They can't defend against these big things. And if they strike in there, you're going to have some definite large-scale casualties. And then what? Then what are we going to do? Now then, President Biden is going to have to respond, or he's going to come under extraordinary pressure to respond, and you can make a terrible situation catastrophic. Right now, he would make a bad situation worse if he acted on these kinds of operations. But what worries me is that he's not that much against it. In fact, when directly asked Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, if Iran is on the table or is it not, he equivocated and said it like this.
We are prepared to deal with anything that any group or any country tries to come at us with. And the president has been clear that we will continue to respond to threats that American forces face as we go forward. The president is determined to respond forcefully to attacks on our people.
Are strikes inside Iran off the table?
Again, Kristen, sitting here on television, it would not be wise for me to talk about what we're ruling in and ruling out.
So what he is willing to tell you is, yeah, we're going to take action that we think is necessary and appropriate, all the implication being that at some point that could be Iran, and then he expressly won't take that off the table, ergo it's on the table by default. Now, again, whether it's Biden or some of these warmongering war firsters who are advocating more forceful measures on Iran, the implication is that what we have done or what we're considering doing would deter Iran. Let's take a look at that aspect of it, because that's really kind of at the heart of this. Because a lot of people say, yeah, Iran has been doing this stuff, so we do need to put them back in a box. Okay, let's examine that. Will that course of action succeed? Let's take a look at, first of all, Jake again telling us what they're doing in terms of the Red Sea issue with the Houthis, and then let's look at something on the backside of that.
We don't accept that what's happening in the Red Sea, for example, Kristen, is entirely tied to the war in Gaza, because the Houthis are attacking shipping that has absolutely nothing to do with Israel. So there are connections among these things, to be sure, but these are distinct threats as well that we need to deal with on their own basis. So in the Red Sea, we need to deal with the threat to commercial shipping, and we are doing so with a coalition of countries.
So on the first point, I mean, he's deceiving himself, or he's trying to deceive you. I'm not sure which it is again. And the saying that there's no connection between what's going on in the war between Israel and Hamas. That's just not true. Well, obviously it's true. They never happened. There was never any interdiction until Israel went into Gaza and started fighting and killing large numbers of Palestinian Arabs. And then now all of a sudden, all these Arab places outside are incensed by that. And so then the Houthis, expressly, directly tied to fighting on the behalf of the Palestinian people, saying that if you'll stop that war, we'll stop this here. They've said that from the first day. They said it again recently. That's what their attacks for. They did some more today. Earlier today, again, there was some clearly showing that all of our actions have not and are not going to deter them. So now it's an open-ended mission, and there's no reason to think it's going to succeed. Again, I point out, Saudi Arabia tried the same thing with the Houthis in Yemen for the better part of a decade and never subdued them. Why do you think American missiles fired from American ships instead of Saudi airplanes is somehow going to work? It's not going to. So they're deluding themselves that these actually succeed. But it's even worse than that. So Afghanistan, for 20 years, we tried to deter and to tell the Taliban there's a price to pay for what you're doing. You should reconcile with the government. They never did, even though we had all the time building up forces. I'm going to talk about that in detail in just a second. Iraq, for the on and off for 21 years and counting. That hasn't deterred anybody. All these strikes that we've done for all these years and all the counterinsurgency wars we fought, and yet the conflict continues on. It hasn't stopped anything, but somehow magically, well, it will if we go into Iran. That's nonsense. Or Syria. Now then, Obama threw them in there in 2014. So you're now close to 10 years on that one. No change. We're not subduing anyone. We're not deterring anyone. The attacks continue on to this very literal day. And now then you want to go into, we're doing the Yemen situation. You want to go into these militants throughout Iraq and Syria. You keep trying the same formula that has been an abject failure. And yet it doesn't deter these war firsters. They are oblivious to the fact that what they're suggesting for Iran, who they claim is the head of the snake, so to speak, and the leading sponsor of terror. You want to go into somebody who has all of those assets and the ballistic military aspect that Mike Domino talked to us about last week. Look, folks, it's like you're going to break into the hornet's nest. And then you'll release all kinds of power on here. And there is no reason to think that Iran would do different than all of these other groups for the last 2 full decades have done. And look, and I saw this firsthand. I know exactly what I'm talking about here. So when I first went to Afghanistan, it was 2005. And at that time, there was, I believe, somewhere around 10,000 American troops. And it was still a relatively benign place. I remember I was able to travel around to Mazar-e-Sharif and to several places, even in Kabul, outside the wire. I didn't even have to wear body armor. Didn't have to carry a rifle. I just had my sidearm, and I was perfectly safe. We were driving around in just a regular pickup truck, totally safe. There wasn't any. We didn't have any concerns at all for the area that we were driving into. When I went back in 2010, 5 years later, what you had is a series of escalations. Every time the casualty count for the U.S. went up, then the administration would follow it, whether it was Bush or Obama, by another deployment. They would increase the number of troops. Then the violence would go up. Then they would increase the number of troops because we just got to get on top of this. Then, of course, the famous 2010 surge that Petraeus advocated and then eventually led. And I saw it go up to 140,000. And now then again, so now I was back on the ground and traveled throughout the country in 2010, 2011 to the front lines of nearly every brigade America had deployed there. And there was a total of around 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops. And the violence, of course, spiked all the way through the roof. Then we ended up withdrawing for the most part, or at least drawing down to about 2,500. And the violence never went down. So whether you sent the troops up or whether you sent the troops down, we trained all of these domestic fighters for the Afghan security forces. We gave them all kinds of weapons, ammunition, training, all those things. And not only did the Taliban never get cowed, they actually continued to rise and get stronger. Let that sink in for a second. All of these things we did with all this surge and everything else never subdued the enemy. They always got stronger, and then eventually our side collapsed and we left in shame. You remember that? It was about 2.5 years ago, and it's still stinging for a lot of people who were there. Who's ever going to forget this image right here? That's the outcome. That's what these war firsters, the policies that they're advocating, this is what it looks like, folks. Look at your screen there. Let that sink in for a second. That's what this is, waiting for America. If we listen to these guys here and go into the hornet's nest, we are not going to subdue the hornet, because listen to me. I'm just telling you, as someone who's done a lot of these analysis and assessments, if you go to war with Iran, if you're going to actually fight a war to defeat their military, you will have to go in on the ground. And you're talking hundreds of thousands of troops, and in a nation that's much, much larger than Iraq was. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. The ground mass is much harder, and the hatred for America among their military there would just be astronomical, and they will fight hard, just like the Ukrainian fighters are fighting really hard against the Russians, the invaders. They'll push them out. We saw the invaders, how bad they were hated in Iraq during the time. Now imagine like times 10. That's what we would be facing here. So when these people try to tell you on national television, let's do this to Iran, that'll show them, that'll teach them a lesson. Look through that through the lens of truth and reality. All these things I'm showing you, all these things I'm telling you are abject facts that can be looked at on the ground. And we've got decades of wreckage of this kind of military first policy. We're producing nothing but disaster for America. It's been embarrassing up to this point. If we cross this line and actually get into a war with Iran, it will be catastrophic. It will be. It could cause our economy to collapse, or we could literally lose a war. You think we can't lose a war? We can lose a war against Iran. Even though the military technology is nearly off the charts of how superior we are to Iran, if you're fighting a soil on their territory, and that's what you would have to do, because they're not just going to surrender because you throw some missiles in the air. They're willing and able to endure that, and they can. You would have to go in on the ground, because if you go to war with them and you don't send on the ground, they'll never surrender, and they'll even do more in the shipping. Remember, they can close down the Strait of Hormuz. As much of a problem as shipping is through the Red Sea, and how that's been interdicted by a few Houthi missiles, that's nothing compared to what Iran could do to shut down the global transportation of crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz, which would shut down like 20% or something like that, a massive disruption that would affect the entire global economy, not the least of which would be ours. They have some levers to pull. They have some effective ballistic missiles, as Mike Domino talked to us about recently. Look, there's things they could do. Even though the overall balance is off, they do have a couple of key, really painful points they could bring upon us. Resist these men, these war firsters. Let's put them in a box and just relegate them to the sidelines of giving nonsense that harm America. You listen to these folks. If Biden gives in to this pressure, it will be harmful to America. And I shudder to think of what the consequences to our country, our economy, and our ultimate freedoms could be if we get sucked into a war against Iran. Don't do it. Resist. Do the right thing, Mr. President. Ignore these people. Take even more proactive action. Get these troops out of these absurd positions in Iraq and Syria. Remove the vulnerability that we have. Increase our position of strength in the region and ensure our security long term. That's what needs to happen. The exact opposite of listening to these war firsters. That's your deep dive for this morning. Be sure and join us this afternoon at 3 p.m. We're going to be covering the latest of what's breaking in the Russia-Ukraine war, and there are some developments. You're not going to want to miss that. Tune in at 3 p.m. Eastern. Like and subscribe, and send this out to your friends so that they can enjoy the same kind of no-kidding information that you need to make sense out of your life. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.